In a small town nestled between rolling hills, a man named Daniel sat alone at the old wooden bar. The dim light danced around him as he stared into the amber liquid in his glass. The clinking of ice echoed in the room, mixing with the soft hum of jazz playing in the background. It was a quiet place filled with regulars who understood that silence could be comforting. Daniel was not just any man. He had a job that weighed on him like a heavy coat. A middle manager at a failing tech company, he often felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, peering down into a dark abyss. His days were filled with meetings that dragged on too long and numbers that rarely added up. He took a deep breath, letting the tension roll off his shoulders as he raised his glass to take a sip. The bar smelled like aged wood and stale beer, but to him it felt like home. His thoughts drifted, and he wished for something more, something that could pull him from this rut. At that moment, the door swung open and a gust of cool air rushed in. A group of men in suits entered, their laughter echoing against the worn walls. Daniel's heart sank. They were from the board. He had seen them before, confident, powerful, like kings surveying their kingdom. They walked over to the bar, and one of them, a tall man with slick back hair, spotted Daniel. "Hey, Danny boy," he called out, laughter spilling from his lips. Daniel felt a flush of embarrassment. It was like he had been caught in a weakness. The board members were the last people he wanted to see. He forced a smile, drained his drink, and waved them over. After exchanging pleasantries, one of them, a different man with tired eyes, turned serious. "You know, Daniel, we've been talking about you." Daniel's stomach dropped. He asked, unsure whether he wanted to know the answer. The confidence in the man's voice felt foreign in Daniel's ears. "We're looking for a new leader. Somebody to take us in a new direction. You're passionate, knowledgeable. Respect." The word hung in the air uneasily. Daniel couldn't remember the last time he felt respected. He was just a cog in the machine, endlessly turning without getting anywhere. He asked almost incredulously. The man nodded, his eyes steady. "We believe you could do it, but you need to make some changes. Start with a drink together." Daniel felt a swell of emotions. Could this really be happening? Was he being noticed at last? As the thought settled, a small spark of excitement ignited within him, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. This could be his moment. The very thing he'd been waiting for, blended with all the nerves of stepping into the unknown. But what if he failed? The thought nagged at him, clawing at his mind. Daniel felt a knot tightening in his stomach. "Okay," he heard himself say, surprising even himself. The team clinked their glasses in agreement, and for the first time in ages, Daniel felt alive. They dove into ideas, dreams, and ambitions. The more they talked, the more he discovered a new version of himself. Each word that left his mouth seemed to resonate, and for the first time he wasn't just speaking, he was being listened to. As the night wore on, he proposed ideas, crafted visions, and bravely challenged the status quo. The board seemed to eat it up, enthusiasm shimmering in the air like the bubbles in their champagne. "We need someone like you," they said, nodding along. It felt like a dance, and Daniel was surprisingly good at it. He became less concerned about the responsibilities and more excited about what could be if he stepped into this role. The adrenaline rushed through his veins, dimming the noise of his insecurities. Hours passed and the bar began to empty out. Daniel didn't notice it at first. His focus had shifted entirely to this chance, a chance to shape the future, to make something from nothing. "We want you to consider taking the role," the tired-eyed man said again, this time with a more serious tone. "We need a leader willing to take risks. We'll back you." Would he really do it? Daniel thought of the years spent at that company, the missed opportunities, the moments of doubt. But the possibilities stretched wide in front of him like a sunlit horizon. He felt drawn to it, to the chance to not just be a nameless face, but to be a force for change. "I'll think about it," he finally said, even though the fire inside him was shouting to say yes. Driving home that night, Daniel felt a storm of thoughts rumbling in his mind. The city lights blinked by like stars in a fading sky. He thought of the gravity of what was being offered. The next morning came too fast. As the sun poured through his window, waking him up, Daniel knew he had to make a choice. He put on the same old clothes, but as he looked in the mirror, he imagined the leader he could be. Later that day, he walked into the office with a new fire in his heart. He sought out the board, the familiar weight of nerves fluttering in his chest. They were all gathered in a conference room, discussing reports when he cleared his throat. "I've made my decision," he started, his voice surprisingly steady. The room fell silent. The board turned to him, their faces a mix of surprise and delight. One asked gently. "Yes," Daniel affirmed. "Have ideas that I believe can change everything, but I can't do it alone." A smile spread across the face of the tired-eyed man. "We'll give it to you," he said, "but it will require big changes, Daniel." More than ever, Daniel felt the weight of the world on him, but this weight was lighter than before, and he could already envision the steps they would take together. As they began mapping out a plan, discussions grew more animated. Decisions were made with laughter and determination. Daniel felt alive. He had found the rhythm of leadership, embracing the role as though it were a long-lost friend. Days turned into weeks. Daniel threw himself into the job, shaking hands, proposing changes, listening, and most importantly, learning. Each challenge was a lesson, and each lesson brought him closer to the man he was meant to be. But with the thrill came moments of doubt. Sometimes, late at night, when silence wrapped around him like a shroud, he could still hear whispers of uncertainty. Was he really made for this? Would he ever squash the lingering shadows of that once timid man at the bar? One day, the board gathered to discuss quarterly results. As Daniel presented the numbers, the energy in the room shifted. There had been genuine growth, a change fueled by his fierce determination. But when he finished, he noticed a few concerned glances exchanged among the board members. "We need to talk, Daniel," the tired-eyed man said again, more serious now. "Your vision is bold." Daniel felt his heart race. Critics had always existed in companies, but now they bore their fangs. "I believe in this," he asserted. "We need to tackle resistance," another board member said. "Your leadership is under scrutiny, Daniel." Daniel took a breath. He was faced with the reality that dreams don't come without challenges. He'd have to unite the team, earn their trust and confidence. He felt fear creeping in, but he pushed it aside. This was part of the journey. That evening, he called for an all-hands meeting. With a room full of anxious employees facing him, he felt a rush of vulnerability. It was one thing to lead from behind a desk. It was another to stand in front of them with all the stakes laid bare. "I know things are tough right now," he began. "You might feel uncertain about the changes I've proposed." As voices spoke up, some hesitant, others critical, Daniel listened. They weren't just speaking, they were sharing their fears, hopes, and frustrations. Bit by bit, he could feel understanding growing among them. Weeks passed, and as he spent time connecting with his team, hearing their stories, the board began to shift too. Dialogue turned into collaboration. They exchanged ideas, and slowly the collective vision began to take shape. The company started to transform. Reports turned around, and success blossomed from the seeds he'd planted. Daniel seemed to ignite a passion that was already there, waiting for the right moment. But even in the triumph, there were curveballs. A competitor launched a product that threatened to overshadow everything they had worked for. The board panicked. Daniel felt that familiar knot reappear in his stomach, but instead of succumbing to fear, he gathered everyone. "We'll face this together," he said, his voice resolute. "Let's innovate." The team rallied. They brainstormed, exhausted but driven. In the face of adversity, they launched a new initiative that bridged gaps and attracted attention. Video conferences turned late into night, filled with laughter, as creativity flourished in the midst of panic. Weeks later, when the new product released, the response was overwhelming. They had not only matched the competitor, but exceeded all expectations. Daniel felt the pulse of unity around him, a symphony of people who had believed and followed him. Healing old wounds took time, but they worked through it, gaining trust. Each small victory stoked the fire in his heart, filling him with a resolve he never realized he possessed. Then came the day when they reached a milestone, a summit of success. Sitting in the same conference room where he once presented nervously, he looked around at the smiling faces. "I couldn't have gotten here without the support from all of you," he said, voice full of meaning. The board stood up, raising their glasses in a toast. "To our leader, Daniel." Cheers erupted, filling the room with elation. Daniel felt something swell in his chest. In that moment, he realized this was more than just a title or a drink shared at a bar. This was about connection, growth, and the power of shared dreams. The journey had transformed him. He had stepped into the unknown, embraced his vulnerabilities, and emerged not just as a leader, but as a part of a community that dreamed together. It all began when he walked into that bar, asking for just a drink, but Daniel found so much more than he bargained for. He found a purpose, a fire, and an unbreakable bond forged through trials and triumphs. "Just one more drink," Daniel murmured, the ice in his glass clinking softly as he swirled it. It was a quiet evening at Joe's bar, a place where time seemed to stand still. The dim glow of the hanging lamps washed over him, dulling the chaos of the week that had just slipped by. He felt invisible, just another face blending into the grainy wood of the bar, but tonight felt different. He slid his gaze down the length of the bar, catching glimpses of laughter and camaraderie among the regulars. It was something he craved but couldn't quite grasp. The weight of being a middle manager at a struggling tech company sat heavy on his shoulders. He was often the one delivering bad news, the one announcing layoffs, the one whose voice trembled under the pressure of more significant forces. Feeling bold, he signaled to the bartender. He needed something to break this cycle, a spark, a change. As the bartender poured him another drink, the door swung open with a creak that echoed through the bar. In walked the board members. Their presence loomed larger than life. Dressed in crisp suits and air thick with confidence, they seemed to own the place, their laughter ringing through the room like applause marking a grand performance. Daniel's stomach churned with a mix of excitement and dread. He had always admired these men from afar. They were powerful, decisive, the sort of people who made things happen. One of them, Robert, the CEO, caught his eye. "Daniel," Robert's voice boomed across the bar, drawing smiles from his fellow board members. Daniel felt his heart race. Did Robert know how small he felt in comparison? "Hey, Robert," he replied, trying to match the excitement in his voice, but it came out weaker than he intended. The group ambled closer, their energy casting a shadow around Daniel. As they chatted, Daniel felt like he was on the outside looking in. They spoke in a language filled with strategy, vision, and victory. It was intoxicating. The longer they stayed, the more he felt the urge to share something, anything that might connect them, to step out of the shadows and into the light. But how? Then, as if the universe was conspiring, Robert turned to him. "You know, Daniel, we've been discussing your potential for quite some time." Those words hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation all at once. The tension in the room shifted. Daniel took a breath, the liquor igniting a fire of courage within him. He asked, his voice steadier now. Robert leaned in. "There's a project on the horizon that needs someone with vision." Desperation and excitement coursed through him. Could this really be his moment, the chance he had longed for? Surrounded by the gaze of the board, Daniel took a deep breath. "I think I could lead that." The words tumbled out, bold and unfiltered. A wave of energy surged through him. The board exchanged glances. Robert raised an eyebrow, a thin smile creeping across his face. "Great." The lights outside began to dim as the conversations around them filled with the promise of some new beginning. Daniel had just stepped off the edge into a chasm of possibility. What followed next was an electric night of brainstorming, ideas weaving in and out like a tapestry being skillfully crafted. But reality soon set in. The adrenaline high faded as the workweek unfolded. Daniel found himself staring at spreadsheets, overwhelmed, wondering if he had overstepped his bounds. The gap between ambition and reality snapped to life, showing him that leading was far more than presenting ideas. It was creating follow-through. The day of the big presentation approached too quickly. Daniel felt the weight of expectations pressing down on him like a heavy fog. Tension rippled through the office. As he stood in front of the board, their eyes were fixed on him, watching closely. His hands trembled slightly, but he squared his shoulders, recalling the confidence he had felt at the bar. He began to speak, pouring out his vision, bold colors, innovative strategies, a path forward. But as the minutes went by, the expressions around the table began to change. Where there had once been excitement, there was now unease. One board member cleared his throat, eyes narrowed. Daniel's heart dropped. It felt like a trap closing in on him. The throat-tightening pressure of self-doubt crept back in. "I believe in this. I think we have to take the leap or we'll be left behind," he tried to defend himself. Another member, a woman with glasses perched on her nose, spoke up. "We need more than just belief." The sounds of chalk scraping against the board echoed. Daniel felt like a student being graded in front of the class. Each question stripped away layers of confidence. Doubts swirled in his mind like a tempest. Had he fallen too far out on a limb? Back at the bar that night, he picked up his drink and downed it in one swallow. The warmth flowed through him, but it felt empty. He was at risk of losing everything: solace, security, and respect. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, his phone pinged. An email notification. It was a memo from the board. More changes were coming, and they wanted clarity on his proposal, a well-defined plan. Daniel rubbed his temples in frustration. How was he supposed to build something meaningful under the scrutiny? Days turned into a blur of anxiety and late nights researching strategies. He flipped through pages filled with reports and charts. When he returned to the boardroom, determination coursed through him. This time he wouldn't let fear dictate his voice. He laid out his updates, a well-structured presentation that left no room for ambiguity. "Here's the proof, here's the support," he asserted confidently. His heart raced as he noticed the expressions around the room shift from skepticism to curiosity. Conversations drew closer to him. Murmurs of agreement floated around the table. "I'm willing to back this," Robert said, surprising not just Daniel but everyone in the room. Relief washed over Daniel, but it was more than that. This was a turning point. He lifted his head, realizing he was transforming from the timid man at the bar into a leader. But even as progress began to surface, the path wasn't linear. Commanding respect required constant resilience. The next few months were filled with navigating setbacks, dealing with unexpected pushback, resistance from the old guard, and the lingering fear that one wrong step could tumble everything he had built. When the team met for strategy sessions, feedback often felt like a double-edged sword. Daniel listened, absorbed, and sometimes felt crushed by the weight of criticism. But he pushed through the discouragement, reminding himself that growth isn't always comfortable. One evening, after a particularly hard day, he took a walk to clear his mind. The city buzzed with life, but Daniel felt lost in thought. In those quiet moments, he reflected on how far he had come. The man who had once walked into that bar seeking a drink was now a force, not just a cog in a machine. Soon the company faced its most significant challenge. A new competitor emerged, threatening everything. Panic rippled through the entire organization. Everyone was worried. As the board convened to discuss responses, the unease in the room was palpable. Robert asked, eyes focused intently on him. The pressure bore down heavily. History had shown that this could make or break him. It was his chance to show not just that he had ideas, but that he had the fortitude to act. "Let's innovate," he said, surprising even himself with the confidence in his voice. "Let's focus on what sets us apart." In the following weeks, Daniel gathered his team around him, encouraging them to find their voices and build on each idea, no matter how small. Together, they fleshed out ideas and dug deep into new strategies that defied simple expectation. As they rallied and pushed boundaries, the unit morphed into something greater than they ever imagined. They began to launch updates, gather feedback from users, and make changes in real time. Months later, on the day of their latest product reveal, the atmosphere in the office brimmed with anticipation. Everyone was nervous but hopeful. Daniel stood backstage before the crowd, peering out as the buzz filled the air. When he finally stepped up to the microphone, he glanced at the faces before him, his team, his supporters, and even those hesitant souls who had once doubted him. Together, we've created something unique. Cheers erupted, and in that moment, something inside Daniel clicked into place. He wasn't just a leader, he was a voice for the people who had rallied with him. The energy and connection surged through him like electricity. The company celebrated success. They broke through the noise of the competition, proving to everyone, not just to themselves, that they could thrive against the odds. Daniel stood back, watching the celebrations unfold, feeling an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He had transformed from that anxious man at the bar into a leader who embraced vulnerabilities, challenges, and successes with open arms. The journey had forged him, built on nights spent with a drink in his hand and words that sparked a ripple. And as the lights of the bar flickered that night, from the warmth of laughter and friendship, he understood what it meant to rise, to stand tall, and to lead. There were always drinks to be shared, but it was the connection that breathed life into every word spoken, every idea shared, and every challenge met head-on. With a cocktail in hand, Daniel realized he wasn't just sipping on liquid courage. He was drinking in the essence of transformation, and he was ready for whatever came next. Just one more drink, Daniel whispered to himself, staring into his glass as it caught the dim light of the bar. The amber liquid swirled lazily, mirroring the turmoil within him. It was a regular Tuesday evening at the Rusty Anchor, a place tucked away at the end of a bustling street where the locals came to forget their troubles. And tonight, Daniel had plenty of troubles to drown. As a mid-level manager in a struggling tech firm, he felt like he was navigating a sinking ship. The stress piled on him like a heavy trap as he pondered the endless meetings, the weighty budget cuts, and the unsure futures of his colleagues. He spotted the bartender polishing glasses behind the counter, his eyes sweeping over the sparse crowd. Between the overhead lights and the oars of tired souls, Daniel felt oddly isolated, like a ghost haunting the very place he sought solace. But then the door swung open, sending a gust of fresh air and laughter into the room. In walked the board, a group of sharp-dressed men and women exuding authority. Their light banter filled the space, making it feel alive again. Daniel's heart raced. They were the top brass, the decision-makers. He admired them from afar, often thinking of how far removed he felt from that level of success. Curiosity tugged at him. Would they notice him? Did they even know he existed? He forced a smile as their laughter crescendoed, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider looking through a glass window. As Robert, the charismatic CEO, approached the bar, Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Robert was everything Daniel wanted to be: confident, sophisticated, someone who took charge and made things happen. Robert caught Daniel's eye, raising an eyebrow in surprise. Daniel's pulse quickened. Just unwinding after a long day, he replied, trying to mask his nerves. The bartender slid a fresh drink in front of him, and Daniel took a sip, hoping the liquid courage would steady his shaky hands. Robert replied, his voice booming. The way he phrased it was more of a command than an invitation, but Daniel felt a spark of hope. With a slight nod, Daniel found himself inching closer to the group, heart pounding like a drum. He felt like he was eavesdropping on a world he longed to be a part of. Then something shifted in the air as Robert turned his attention back to him. "You know, Daniel, we've been talking about your potential." The words landed like a dream wrapped in reality. His mind raced. Was he really hearing this? "Stepped up?" he asked, keeping his tone steady, even as excitement bubbled beneath the surface. Robert leaned closer, a grin forming on his face. "We have a new project that could redefine our company." With those words, Daniel felt an electric jolt of emotion. This was it, the moment he had always dreamed of. But as excitement danced in his chest, a darker shadow crept in. Doubt. Could he really take on such a monumental task? "I'll think about it," he managed to say, but it felt like the words didn't fully belong to him. The discussion continued, filled with passionate ideas and ambitious plans. Daniel's head swirled, and for the first time he opened his mouth to share his thoughts. "What if we approached it from a different angle? Innovation and quality over quantity," he suggested, his voice stronger than he felt. To his surprise, instead of dismissal, the room filled with nods and murmurs of agreement. He had sparked interest. The more they spoke, the more alive he felt, adrenaline kicking in as he began to envision himself as part of this world, leading it, shaping it. But as the night wore on, when the drinks began to flow a little too freely, Daniel had the nagging realization that this was a superficial connection. What if the warmth and acceptance didn't last? Fleeting moments of savvy discussions in a bar didn't create lasting legacies. Days turned into weeks as Daniel grappled with a choice, one that weighed heavily on his shoulders. The idea of stepping up to lead gnawed at him, mixing excitement with anxiety. He met with the board several times, each meeting filled with energy and buzzing ideas. They began shaping a plan together, but under the bright lights of the conference room, he felt the specter of self-doubt circle around him. When the day of his big presentation arrived, Daniel stood in front of the board's panel, heart racing like never before. It was a mixture of nerves and excitement, the two entwined tightly like vines around a tree. This was his chance to showcase everything he had learned and everything he believed they could do together. He began with his vision, pouring everything into his words, the innovation, the strategy, the people. But halfway through, anxiety seeped in as he noticed the board's expressions harden. "We need to ensure this is feasible, Daniel," one of the members cautioned, his voice sharp. The room grew tense, all eyes shifted back to Daniel. Suddenly he felt stripped bare in front of them. "Yes, I can provide that," he stammered, scrambling to back up his ideas with facts and numbers as if that would regain their confidence in him. But it had already started to slip away. Anxiety pooled at the base of his stomach. Here he was, a man who had once dreamed of being a leader, now feeling like a sinking ship amid a raging storm. Caught between ambition and reality, Daniel felt small. That night he returned to the rusty anchor, seeking comfort in its familiarity, but instead of solace he found despair. As he took a sip of his drink, the weight of his failure pressed heavily on his chest. Could he really take on this responsibility? The longer he stayed lost in doubt, the heavier the emptiness grew. The weeks rolled by, filled with attempts to regain his footing. Each meeting seemed to amplify the pressure, leading him further down a path of uncertainty. But just when he thought he'd reached the end of the line, a breakthrough emerged from the chaos. Gathering his courage, he approached the board with a new proposal. With renewed determination, he tailored his ideas based on the feedback he received, clearly mapping out how this project could succeed within the constraints of their budget. The breakthrough transformed his anxious energy into something beautiful. Vulnerability turned into strength. To his surprise, when he presented this new direction, their demeanor shifted. They didn't just see an employee, they saw a leader emerging. Robert declared, a sense of excitement igniting the room once more. The rush of validation surged through him like a flame flickering to life in the dark. The board slowly shifted from critics to supporters. Each member brought their strengths to the table, rallying behind him. It felt as if he was now steering the ship instead of drifting aimlessly, but with new momentum came challenges. The external pressures grew louder. Reports of competitors began flooding in, a sharp reminder that they were not alone in their ambitions. As the clock ticked down to their launch date, tension crackled in the air like static electricity. In that moment, standing on the edge of fear, Daniel gathered his team. He needed them. He opened up about his anxiety and the pressures that weighed on his shoulders. "I know we're facing an uphill battle," he admitted, voice steady despite the late-night exhaustion that lingered in the background. The mixture of empathy and strength in that moment ignited something within them. Ideas began flowing freely, deepening the collaboration. The more they worked through the fear together, the more fortified their bond became. Weeks melted into relentless hours, and slowly they began to piece together something extraordinary. Their brainstorming sessions transformed into a hive of creativity, with speculation morphing into reality, until they finally arrived at a product truly worth unveiling. As they approached the launch day, Daniel felt the thrill ripple through him. The doubts still flickered in the back of his mind, but the support from his team built an unshakable foundation. On the day of the launch, the atmosphere felt electric, and he embraced the moment like a long-lost friend. Standing in front of the crowd, the anticipation thick in the air, he lifted his chin, meeting the gazes of his colleagues, each one carrying a measure of hope. "Today is more than just a launch, it's a testament to what we can achieve when we believe in each other," he proclaimed. The applause thundered through the room, washing over him like a warm wave. Suddenly, he was no longer a man standing alone in a bar asking for a drink. He was a leader who had navigated storms, embraced challenges, and emerged stronger, a powerful force propelled by the belief of a united team. The moment felt surreal, and as success met them head-on, Daniel recognized this journey had been forged from vulnerable beginnings. The drink that had once been a crutch had become a symbol of connection, growth, and audacity. Through courage and resilience, he had transformed from a mere observer into a guiding force. And in the aftermath, as the celebration echoed long into the night, he held his glass high, toast ready, realizing that sometimes it only takes one drink to set the wheels of destiny in motion. Just one more drink. Daniel leaned against the bar at the rusty anchor, watching the amber liquid swirl in his glass. The bar felt familiar. It was his refuge from the chaos of his corporate life, filled with endless meetings and the dreaded budget cuts that seemed to loom around every corner. But this evening felt different. There was an electric tension in the air. Laughter erupted from a group of suits at the corner table, the unmistakable sounds of the board members from his company, the very men and women who held the power to shape his future. Daniel felt a mix of admiration and envy wash over him. They were vibrant, full of confidence, just a few years older than him, but already light years ahead in success. As he took a sip from his drink, he couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be in their shoes, commanding rooms and demanding respect. Just then, Robert, the charismatic CEO, caught sight of him. Daniel, Robert's voice boomed across the bar, slicing through the haze of Daniel's thoughts. He straightened up, forcing a smile. Just relaxing after a long day, he replied, trying to sound casual. But deep down, his heart raced. Did Robert recognize him? Come over. We're discussing the future of the company, Robert said with a wave, a booming invitation that sounded like a command. Daniel hesitated for a brief moment, the weight of uncertainty resting heavy on his chest, but this was his chance, a gateway into a world he had only observed from a distance. He set down his glass and walked over, the familiar floor of the bar suddenly feeling like the grand stage of a theater. Robert, flanked by board members, made way for him. Daniel, come join us. We could use your insights, he encouraged, motioning for Daniel to take a seat. That simple phrase sent a rush of adrenaline through Daniel. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. As conversations flowed, he felt the weight of their attention like a spotlight illuminating a stage. He listened, absorbing their discussions about market trends, innovation strategies, and the vision for the future. It was intoxicating. Then Robert turned to him, eyes sparkling. You know, Daniel, we've been talking. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He managed to ask, fighting against the tide of disbelief washing over him. The board is looking for someone to lead a new project, Robert said, leaning in closer, a conspiratorial grin forming on his lips. We could really use your creative input. For a split second, the world around him faded away. All his insecurities, all the moments of self-doubt that had clouded him for years, faded into the background. Yes, he said, his voice stronger than he felt. The board erupted in applause, their energy palpable in the small space of the bar. He felt like he had crossed a threshold, stepping into a realm that had previously felt unattainable. Daniel spent the rest of the night animatedly discussing ideas, exchanging banter, and for the first time, imagining himself as more than just a mid-level manager. But as the euphoria of the moment began to fade, reality set back in. The next morning, he sat at his cluttered desk, staring at the blinking cursor on his screen. Questions spiraled in his mind. What had he gotten himself into? Could he really lead this project? Doubt began to creep in like a spider, threading its web around his thoughts. The weeks rolled by, and Daniel dove headfirst into his new role. Initially, the rush of excitement kept him afloat. He bounced ideas around with his team, crafted presentations, and even mapped out strategies that felt bold and innovative. But as he got deeper into the work, the pressures of leadership began to reveal themselves. In one of the first meetings he led, Daniel could feel the eyes of the board watching him intently. As he laid out his plans, the reactions were mixed. Some members nodded in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. We can really capture the market with this new approach, he insisted, but doubt began to creep back in when he noticed the board members whispering among themselves. After the meeting, Robert called him into his office. We need to talk, he said, a serious tone cutting through the usual joviality. Your ideas are solid, Daniel, but we need more grounding. The criticism cut deeper than he expected. He felt the weight of their expectations pressing down, suffocating him. I understand, he replied, trying to maintain his composure. The thought of disappointing them loomed like a storm cloud over his head. What was he doing wrong? The rebellion of self-doubt began again, louder this time, gnawing at his confidence. That evening, sitting in the quiet solitude of his apartment, Daniel pondered. Perhaps he had overstepped. Maybe this was all just a pipe dream. As he poured himself a drink, seeking comfort in a familiar routine, he realized he had to figure this out. If he wanted to prove himself, he needed to dig deeper to find that fire that had sparked the board's interest in the first place. The next day, he attacked the challenge with renewed vigor. He gathered his team, diving deep into their collective ideas, pulling from their strengths and brainstorming together. The tension in the room lifted as they bounced thoughts between them. In those moments, he felt the energy shift. Maybe together they could create something truly innovative. Let's come back to the board with something that blows their socks off, Daniel urged, feeling the enthusiasm ripple through the group. They worked late into the night, animated discussions filled with laughter and camaraderie, igniting a spark within Daniel that had dimmed in the face of adversity. Finally, they settled on a cohesive plan, one that was bold, creative, and most importantly, grounded in data. On the day of the presentation, Daniel stood before the board, confidence radiating from every fiber of his being. As he spoke, he watched their faces transform, nods of agreement, sounds of excitement as he illustrated their vision. Here's how we intend to disrupt the market, he concluded, wrapping up the presentation with enthusiasm. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Robert exclaimed, beaming, but the victory was short-lived. A few days later, news broke of a new competitor emerging in their space. It sent shockwaves through the company, panic swirling like a tempest. The board convened to discuss strategy amidst a frantic atmosphere. Robert asked, his tone firm but tinged with urgency. All eyes turned to him, piercing through his carefully erected facade. Anxiety bubbled within him, panic rising. They could take away our clients, another member said, their voice low, fear threading through the room. Daniel took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He had been so focused on innovation, but now it felt like the ground was crumbling beneath him. Yet amid the chaos, something sparked inside him. "We need to innovate faster," he said, interrupting the spiraling doubts. The board exchanged worried glances, but Daniel pressed on. "We have the resources, the passion, and the creativity to outpace them." That evening, after the meeting, he fled to the Rusty Anchor again, desperately seeking solace. As he sank into a worn bar stool, the bartender recognized him and poured a drink without asking. It felt comforting to be in a place where the stakes weren't so high. But it was here, in the cadence of laughter and casual conversation, that clarity began to emerge. Daniel realized that he couldn't fight this alone. He needed his team more than ever. They were innovative thinkers, and together they could shape a response that would leave the competition scrambling. The next day, he gathered them in a huddle, laying out the stark realities they faced. "Look, we're up against a challenge, but I believe in us," he declared. "Let's innovate, let's be bold." Together, they crafted an agile plan, one that took into account the changing landscape while still pushing forward with their original ideas. Collective brainstorming sessions stretched late into the night, fostering a camaraderie that fueled their determination. Weeks later, the launch day arrived, nerves fluttering like a swarm of butterflies in Daniel's stomach. Standing on stage, he glanced out into the audience and saw colleagues who had evolved into friends. He caught their eyes, noticing the belief they had in him, and suddenly he felt a sense of calm wash over him. "This isn't just about a product, it's about teamwork, resilience, and the ability to adapt," he proclaimed, passion coursing through his voice. As the audience erupted with applause, he felt every ounce of self-doubt evaporate. He had grown, transformed from the timid employee who once sat at the bar to a leader who had willingly embraced the weight of responsibility. As the product successfully launched, the buzz of excitement filled the air. Daniel could feel the energy buzzing throughout the company. It was a moment of triumph. This journey had not merely been about proving his worth. It had been a path of discovery, realizing that true leadership emerged from collaboration, vulnerability, and shared dreams. That night, Daniel walked into the Rusty Anchor, not for solace this time, but to celebrate. He raised his glass to the very same group that had once seemed so alien to him, the board members who had chosen to believe in him. The warmth in the air felt palpable, and the laughter echoed through the bar like a sweet melody. Robert shouted, lifting his glass high. The room erupted in laughter and clinking glasses, and for the first time, Daniel felt like he truly belonged. What had begun with just a drink at the bar had metamorphosed into something far greater: a journey, a shared vision, and a community built on trust and collaboration. In that embrace of camaraderie, he realized he had found not just his place in the company, but found himself. Just one more drink, Daniel thought as the glass slid smoothly across the bar top toward him. The cool smoothness of the glass felt comforting in his hand. It was an ordinary Tuesday night, but this night had a weight to it, an air of promise wrapped in uncertainty. The neon lights from the bar flickered against the polished wood, casting playful shadows, but the real source of tension wasn't the ambience, it was the group of suited men and women seated at the far end. He recognized them, all his company's board members. They lounged, brimming with confidence, their laughter rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks. Daniel, on the other hand, felt like a tiny boat adrift in a storm, tossed around, unsure of his course. After a grueling day of numbers and reports, he needed to unwind, yet the sight of them filled him with both admiration and dread. His job as a mid-level manager at a failing tech company often made him feel invisible. He spent his days drowning under the weight of budget cuts and employee layoffs, driven by a desperate need to keep the company afloat. The environment was increasingly hostile, and with every meeting, the walls seemed to close in around him. But tonight, he wanted to feel free, even if just for a moment. He took a sip, letting the whiskey burn slightly as it slid down his throat. He closed his eyes, imagining a life where he was leading the very board that seemed so intimidating. Suddenly, Robert, the charismatic CEO with an imposing presence, caught his eye. "Daniel," he exclaimed, gesturing for Daniel to come over. A rush of adrenaline surged through him. Did Robert want him to join them? Daniel hesitated only for a second before his feet moved under him, carrying him to the glimmering table where the board leaned back, their eyes curious and expectant. Was it possible that he could step into a world that had always felt just out of reach? "Come on, Daniel, we want to hear your thoughts on the new project," Robert said, a smile spreading across his face as he gestured toward an empty chair. The words hit Daniel like a wave of heat. His heart raced. Could this be his chance? He settled into the chair, feeling the weight of their gazes. Conversation flowed, a mix of industry jargon and laughter, and Daniel felt his nerves slowly dissipate as the whiskey warmed him from the inside out. As the night wore on, he listened intently, catching snippets of their plans, a new product launch designed to reinvigorate the company's stagnant growth. And then, unexpectedly, Robert turned to him. "What do you think, Daniel? We need fresh insight. You've got a knack for innovative ideas." Daniel felt his throat tight. He wanted to speak, to share his thoughts, but fear gripped him. What if they dismissed his ideas? But as if a trigger had been pulled, he leaned forward, passion surging within him. I think you should consider targeting a younger demographic, modernize the branding, he said, more boldly than he had intended. To his surprise, Robert nodded. Interesting, the floodgates opened and Daniel poured out his thoughts. He spoke of breakthrough strategies that tapped into social media trends, how his generation's engagement with technology could be harnessed to reshape the company's image. Every word felt like a brush stroke on a blank canvas, creating a vibrant picture. As he spoke, the board members leaned closer, their expressions shifting from skepticism to intrigue. He felt a rush, an exhilarating sensation that made him feel alive. Was this how it felt to be in control, to be part of something larger than yourself? When the night finally came to a close, Robert clapped Daniel on the back with a friendly grin. You've got something there, Daniel. As he left the bar, Daniel's mind swirled wildly. He didn't just feel energized, he felt transformed. What had started as a desperate night for a drink had led him to a flicker of hope, a spark of possibility. The next day, a mysterious email popped into his inbox, a meeting with the board. His heart raced. This was either a good sign or a crushing blow. He feared they might have just been humoring him, but his curiosity propelled him forward. When he entered the conference room, the air crackled with tension. The board was assembled, each face set with expressions that suggested they were expecting something significant. Daniel, Robert began, we've been discussing what you shared with us last night. The words echoed through his mind, lead him, felt surreal, like being thrust into the spotlight of a stage he never knew he auditioned for. I'd be honored, Daniel stammered, trying to mask the storm of emotions surging through him. We'll need a plan, something detailed, and you'll have to rally the rest of the team. Another board member added, seriousness etched on his face. Daniel swallowed hard, suddenly feeling the weight of the task ahead. He had never led anything before, not like this. The weight of their expectations loomed, heavy as an anchor, as he considered what lay on his shoulders. I understand, he replied, trying to sound confident. The first few weeks were exhilarating but overwhelming. Daniel immersed himself in meetings, brainstorming sessions, and countless late nights fueled by caffeine and ambition. He felt the relentless pressure of the board's expectations on his back, like a vice tightening with each passing day. But self-doubt crept in like a fog. Was he truly equipped for this? Each time he presented to the board, he could sense the weight of their gaze. After every presentation, he would walk away feeling like he had barely scraped by. One board member would probe, her brow furrowed in worry. Another would ask, their tone cautious. Each time Daniel would leave the room feeling smaller, the walls closing in around him as doubt whispered in his ear. Maybe he was meant to be behind the scenes and not leading. One evening, after another long day, he returned to the rusty anchor. Once again, he sought solace in the amber liquid. He couldn't shake the feeling of failure gnawing at him. As he sat in the familiar quiet, watching the patrons enjoy their evening, Daniel felt like an outsider again, trapped between two worlds, but something inside him stirred. He reminded himself that every great leader faced moments of uncertainty. He needed to harness that energy to transform doubt into determination. The next day, he gathered his team for a candid meeting. Okay, everyone, I'm feeling the pressure, and I know you are too, but I believe we can turn this around. With renewed vigor, ideas began to flow. They dove deep into discussions, sketching out innovative designs and marketing strategies. The energy in the room shifted, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt empowered. He wasn't just a manager, he was a leader, guiding his team to dream big. As weeks went by, progress began to unfold. They crafted a comprehensive pitch that blended creativity with data-driven goals. On the surface, Daniel felt more assured, but deep down he clung to an undercurrent of worry. Would it be enough? When the day of the big presentation rolled around, Daniel stood in front of the board, anxiety swirling in his stomach like a reckless storm. Their eyes were locked on him, full of expectation. It's showtime, he mumbled under his breath, drawing strength from the faces of his team standing behind him. As he launched into the presentation, confidence coursed through him. The numbers backed him up, the passion for the idea filled every word, and as he spoke, he noticed the board members nodding, engaged in what he was saying. The room felt electric, and he fed off that energy, amplifying it with each passing moment. When he reached the end of his pitch, the silence in the room was tangible. Then Robert broke the quiet with a warm smile. This is exactly what we've been looking for, Daniel. The relief washed over Daniel like a warm tide, and as applause erupted, he felt a surge of joy welling up inside him. It wasn't just a victory for him, it was a victory for his entire team, for everyone who had believed in him. Over the next few months, their project launched, and the results were astounding. As the company began to gain traction again, the board called for a celebratory meeting. Daniel entered the conference room with hesitant confidence, still aware of the distance he had traveled over the past several months. Today, we can officially say the project was a success, Robert declared, grinning broadly. But more importantly, we have Daniel to thank for stepping up and leading us through this. Excellent work, Daniel. A rush of warmth filled his chest as he realized he was no longer just a mid-level manager. He had transformed into a leader, someone whose voice could echo throughout the company. The board members leaned forward with smiles as Daniel soaked in their approval. As he left that meeting, the weight of self-doubt that had burdened him for so long melted away. He had learned that leadership was not just about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about connection, collaboration, and embracing vulnerability. That night, he returned to the Rusty Anchor. When he walked in, the familiar sounds of laughter greeted him, and the warmth of nostalgia wrapped around him like a comforting embrace. He approached the bar and raised his glass for the bartender. "Just one more drink," he said, a smile spreading across his face. Tonight wasn't just a celebration, it was a testament to the journey he had taken. From that first drink alone to leading a project that had breathed new life into his company, he had stepped into his power. He had transformed through challenges and setbacks, emerging stronger on the other side. As he took a sip from his glass, he looked around the room and felt a sense of belonging. He smiled at the thought that perhaps sometimes all it takes is one drink to change your life, to unlock a path to greatness, and to embrace the leader that was waiting to be discovered within. Just one more drink, Daniel thought as he sat at the small bar in the corner of the Rusty Anchor, swirling his glass of whiskey. The familiar sound of ice clinking echoed softly around him, mixing with the low murmur of conversation that filled the dimly lit space. He had been coming to this bar for years, a regular in a world that felt increasingly chaotic, but tonight had a different flavor. It was a Tuesday evening, and while others filled the seats with laughter and camaraderie, Daniel remained encased in his thoughts, grappling with a weight that seemed heavier than usual. He was staring down the barrel of another critical month at the tech company where he was a mid-level manager, responsible for a team that often felt like they were teetering on the edge of failure. On the other side of the bar, a group of familiar faces caught his attention, the board members. Their laughter echoed like a siren's call, powerful and magnetic. Daniel couldn't help but admire their confidence as they clinked their glasses together, their conversation peppered with plans for the future and bold ambitions. It made his heart ache with longing. He wanted that life, the influence, the power, that feeling of control. Just last week, he had delivered a tough message to his team about layoffs. He could still feel the stares of disappointment, the cut of their hope. Loss and uncertainty hung thick in the air, and he wished he could be one of those seated at the table. He took a deep breath, tapping his fingers nervously on his glass, a rhythm only he could hear. The thought sent a rush of adrenaline through him, and he swallowed hard. Just as he steeled himself to act, Robert, the CEO, stood up and shouted, "Hey, Daniel." He beckoned Daniel with a wide grin, eyes sparkling with mischief and camaraderie. Daniel's heart raced. Could this be his moment? He set his glass down, wiped his palms on his jeans, and walked over, 1,000 thoughts tumbling through his mind all at once. "Join us, we're talking about the future of the company," Robert declared, clapping Daniel on the back as he motioned him to sit down. The air crackled with anticipation. Daniel took a seat, the warmth of their interest enveloping him like a blanket. The conversation flowed, bold ideas whirled around the table like the whiskey in their glasses. Daniel listened closely, absorbing the energy, trying to find a moment to contribute. Then it happened. Robert leaned back and turned to Daniel. "We need your insights, my friend." Daniel blinked, feeling a rush of heat rise to his cheeks. This was it, the moment he had fantasized about repeatedly. He took a deep breath, fighting the anxiety threatening to bubble up. "Well," he began, trying to inject confidence into his voice, "I think we should focus on modernizing our brand." The room went silent, everyone looking at him. Was it too bold? Had he overstepped? But then Robert nodded, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "I like that." That simple affirmation propelled Daniel forward, and he found himself diving deeper into the conversation, sharing ideas and thoughts that had been simmering beneath the surface. The more he spoke, the more liberated he felt, as if he were shedding the layers of doubt he had worn for far too long. As the night wore on, Daniel could feel the energy shift in the room, becoming palpable. The board members were engaged, leaning in with genuine interest, and by the end of the evening, Robert clapped him on the shoulder again. "You've got a real knack for this, Daniel. We might just need you to step up for the project," he said, his grin wide and sincere. Daniel left the Rusty Anchor that night with his heart racing, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Could it be? Was he really in line for a change? The next morning, his usual self-doubt had returned like a persistent ghost. He wondered, staring blankly at his computer screen. His heart dropped. He felt as if an electrical current raced through him. What did this mean? Did they really want him to lead something? When the time came, Daniel entered the conference room, the far wall lined with bold, inspirational quotes and a giant screen displaying the company's mission statement. The board was gathered, engaged in serious discussions, and he could feel the anticipation in the air. Robert cleared his throat, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Daniel, we've been talking about your insights from last night." Daniel's breath caught in his throat, led him, it hardly felt real. His mind raced, battling between disbelief and the urge to say yes. I would be honored," he finally stuttered, trying to project confidence. Yet every word felt like a double-edged sword. What did he know about being a leader? The board members nodded, their expectations radiating off them like heat. "We need a plan, something bold and well thought out," one member prompted. Daniel pushed back against the icy wave of intimidation crashing over him. "Yes. As he stepped out of the meeting, a mix of exhilaration and terror surged through him. This was his chance to prove himself, not just to the board, but to himself. The air practically crackled with potential, and he felt propelled into a new chapter of his life, one ripe with challenge and excitement. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of energy and uncertainty. Daniel immersed himself in work, drowning in strategy papers, ideas, and more meetings than he could count. He pushed himself to stay ahead, but anxiety whispered in the back of his mind, taunting him. What if he failed? With each passing day, the pressure mounted. He began leading team meetings, yet he still grappled with a sense of imposter syndrome. Some days he felt like he was faking it, and when he stood in front of the board, the tension in the room was palpable. "Let's see your numbers," someone would say, their arms crossed, skepticism painting their faces. Echoed another voice, the familiar stabs of doubt, weaving through his once bright confidence. Daniel would leave those meetings feeling deflated, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. One late evening, he found himself at the Rusty Anchor again, seeking refuge in the familiar setting. As he took a sip of whiskey, he stared at the frosted glass, searching for answers in its swirls. How could he regain the spark he had felt in his first meeting? In that moment, he realized he was not alone. Sitting at the bar were a few colleagues, laughing, discussing ideas, and sharing strategies. They worked together, fed off each other's energy, and Daniel felt the warmth of motivation wash over him. He called out, interrupting their laughter. The group turned to him, curiosity reflected in their eyes. "We're stronger as a team, right?" That night, as they bounced ideas off each other, something remarkable happened. Each concept gained momentum, building off each other's strengths. Daniel began to see the forest through the trees, and for the first time in weeks, he felt hope flicker back to life. The team pulled together a proposal that was dynamic and innovative, highlighting collaboration, but also each member's individual talents. When they presented it to the board, Daniel felt a tidal wave of adrenaline surge through him. Standing in front of the board once more, he watched as Robert took a sip from his coffee, the light streaming in from the windows illuminating the intensity of the moment. He started confidently, laying out a well-thought-out plan. As he spoke, he noticed nods of agreement around the table. "We've constructed a narrative centered around our younger audience, leveraging both digital platforms and traditional engagement strategies. Here's why it matters," he emphasized, pointing to the projected graphs rising sharply on the screen behind him. The room felt electric. For the first time, he could sense anticipation, not skepticism. "This is what we need. This is a game changer," Robert exclaimed, his eyes alight. Applause erupted as Daniel concluded the presentation. There it was, the validation he had once doubted he would ever feel. He was leading, actively crafting change, and not just for himself, but for everyone on his team. Weeks turned into months as the project unfolded and flourished. The responses were overwhelmingly positive. For the first time in ages, the company felt alive with excitement. Daniel thrived amidst the momentum, learning the ebb and flow of leadership, embracing both triumphs and setbacks. The challenges sharpened him, fortified his resolve, and connected him to his team in ways he had never imagined. But just as success blossomed, an unexpected storm approached. A new competitor launched a product that threatened to overshadow their hard work. The board convened again, the tension thickening the air. "Daniel," Robert began, his tone serious, "how do we respond?" Daniel felt the weight of every gaze upon him, the intensity of the scrutiny spiraling in like a tight coil. The feeling echoed past moments of self-doubt, yet strangely, it ignited a fire within him. "We can't let this define us," he said, finding his voice within the haze. "We need to double down on what makes us unique. Let's focus our energy on the extraordinary, the creativity that got us here in the first place." Board members listened, trading glances, and after a charged silence, Robert nodded. "I like it. Let's explore this strategy further." That night, as the team gathered once more at the Rusty Anchor, the atmosphere began to change. They were no longer just colleagues, they had become bones of a larger structure, their connections woven together stronger than ever. "Let's innovate," Daniel urged, his heart racing with exhilaration. "Let's brainstorm ideas that push boundaries and defy expectations." Ideas began flowing freely again, each one building upon the last, laughter punctuating the atmosphere as creativity erupted in bursts. They crafted a response that was not just reactive but a dynamic shift, reinforcing their identity while capitalizing on emerging trends. When the day of their counter-launch arrived, Daniel felt an exhilarating mixture of fear and excitement. He stood in front of the crowd that had cheered for him before, hearts pounding in anticipation. He shouted, the power of his voice rippling through the room. Cheers erupted as applause reverberated against the walls. For Daniel, every round of applause was affirmation, a rallying cry that reminded him of how far he had come. He was a leader now, not merely by title but by action. The product soared, the company regained its footing, and Daniel learned the essence of what it meant to lead. It wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about the connections forged and the collective beliefs cultivated. That night when he walked into the Rusty Anchor, the atmosphere felt different. The familiar sounds of laughter and conversation greeted him warmly. He approached the bar and the bartender poured his drink with a knowing smile. He lifted the glass in a salute to himself, to the journey he had traveled, and to the growth that had unfolded through adversity. To new beginnings, he declared, a hint of mischief dancing in his eyes. In that moment, he recognized the transformation that had taken place, not just within himself, but among the people he had welcomed alongside him. Leadership was not just about guiding others, it was about the shared experience, the trials faced together, and the victories savored. With each sip of whiskey, he realized that sometimes all it takes is one drink, one moment of bravery to ignite the flame of something extraordinary. Daniel raised his glass, a fire burning deep in his heart, ready for whatever came next on this exciting journey of life. Just one more drink, Daniel murmured to himself as he sat at the bar, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The familiar sounds of the Rusty Anchor surrounded him, where the laughter of regulars mingled with the soft jazz playing in the background. The dim light created a warm atmosphere, but Daniel felt anything but warm. His job as a mid-level manager at a tech company had been draining him lately. The pressure of meeting quotas was relentless, and his team had seen cuts that left them scrambling. Daniel wanted to escape for just one night. He wished only for a few moments of freedom, to lead a life filled with purpose and power instead of constant worry. He took a sip of his drink, the burn igniting a flicker of courage in his chest. As he scanned the bar, he spotted a group of people at a corner table. His heart sank. They were the board members, the power players in crisp suits. They laughed and chatted animatedly, a mix of ambition and success radiating from them. Daniel admired that confidence, yet felt the familiar pang of inferiority creeping in. As he took another sip, he wondered about their conversations. What was it like being on their level? What would it take for him to break through? Suddenly, the door swung open, and in walked Robert, the company's charismatic CEO. His larger-than-life presence commanded attention wherever he went. Robert's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Daniel. "Hey, Daniel," Robert called out, his voice booming above the noise and laughter. Daniel's pulse quickened. Did Robert actually want to talk to him? Just, unwinding a bit, Daniel replied, trying not to sound nervous. Robert waved him over, a gesture so casual yet so monumental. It felt as though the universe had conspired for this moment. Daniel stood, his heart racing, and made his way to the table, fighting the instinct to retreat. As he joined the board members, Daniel felt the tension ease. They included him in their conversation, discussing the new product launch, strategies, and future visions. He absorbed every word, marveling at their confidence and charisma. But then Robert turned to him, his gaze piercing through the noise. "Daniel, we've been talking about you." Daniel's breath caught. Step up, could it be true? He managed to ask, fighting back his excitement. "We're looking for someone to lead this new initiative, and you've shown promise. We think you'd be a great fit," Robert explained, his eyes shining. A rush of adrenaline surged through Daniel. Lead him. The very thought brought both exhilaration and crippling doubt. "I'll think about it," he replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. That night his thoughts raced in circles as he lay in bed. The possibility of leading a project filled him with hope, but also fear. Could he handle it? What if he failed? He tossed and turned, but the excitement simmered just beneath the surface. The next morning he arrived at the office ready to conquer the day. With renewed intention, he gathered his team, eager to share the news. "I've been given the chance to lead a new initiative," he said, his voice steady. Initially, a wave of uncertainty passed through the group, but as he shared more details, their interest sparked. They began to brainstorm ideas, excitement building like wildfire. For the first time, Daniel felt like he belonged to something significant. Weeks passed, and their ideas flourished. Daniel crafted presentations, outlined strategies, and enjoyed the palpable energy in the room. He felt more alive than he had in years, invigorated by the collective ambition of his colleagues. But as the project developed, so did the pressure. When he presented to the board, their critical gazes felt like daggers. Every time he spoke, he noticed their expressions shifting from curiosity to skepticism. Each time, Daniel fought back the rising tide of insecurity. "Yes, I can provide data to back this up," he insisted, making every effort to prove himself. But each meeting left him feeling heavier, as if the weight of his ambition was pinning him down. One cool evening, he returned to the Rusty Anchor, seeking comfort in solitude. The familiar atmosphere felt different tonight. He slid onto the bar stool, and a cold drink was instantly placed in front of him, as though the bartender could sense his tension. Daniel drained half the drink in one gulp, hoping the burn would wash away his worries. He glanced around the room, half-heartedly seeking inspiration. Across the bar, he noticed a group of friends laughing over drinks, their camaraderie a stark contrast to his growing isolation. He whispered to himself, sliding down in his seat. Just then, a thought struck him. Were the board members really the only ones who recognized his potential? He had to change that. The next day, he reached out to his team, inviting them to a brainstorming session. "We need to come together and reshape our approach," he said, leaning in with intention. What followed was a whirlwind of creativity. As ideas bounced off the walls, Daniel felt the doubts start to fade. They drew inspiration from one another, crafting a new vision that resonated with everyone. The energy in the room ignited, and Daniel found himself thriving among the collective ambition. Weeks later, they prepared to present their revamped proposal to the board. Daniel felt a mix of nerves and excitement course through him. When the time came, he stood before the board with his team at his back, ready to fight for their vision. This project isn't just about numbers, it's about connecting with our customers on a deeper level, he began, his voice steady as he pointed to the charts displayed behind him. The board members leaned forward, engaged, and as he continued, Daniel felt a swell of confidence wash over him. He poured his passion into every word, transforming data into a story that they could all believe in. When he finished, there was silence. The board exchanged glances until Robert, a smile breaking across his face, began to clap. "Excellent work, Daniel." The applause from the board swelled, filling the room with affirmation. The next few months were a whirlwind. The project launched, and the results surpassed everyone's expectations. The company began to turn around, and Daniel relished in the sweetness of progress. He felt different now, empowered, as though he had stepped into a new identity. But with success came new challenges. A rival company launched an initiative that threatened to undermine their progress, and the board called another meeting, anxiety palpable in the air. Robert asked, concern etched into his features. His thoughts raced as he felt the familiar weight settle back on his shoulders. "We need to be proactive," he suggested, shaking off the shroud of fear that began to creep back in. The room went silent, but Daniel could feel the energy shifting. This was his moment to guide them again. As they strategized, the board began to rally behind him. Their combined strengths melded into a new plan, one that was collaborative and sparked with innovation. As they finalized the details, Daniel felt the camaraderie deepen, the connection solidifying into a formidable force. With the new plan set in motion, Daniel stood in front of his colleagues. "This is more than just a project. It's our chance to redefine our identity, to show everyone who we really are," he declared, his voice resonating with belief. And so they pushed forward, implementing their ideas with fervor. Days turned into weeks filled with late nights and relentless determination. Together, they transformed a crisis into an opportunity, setting the stage for an inspiring comeback. When the launch day arrived, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and dread. Standing on stage with his team, he could sense the palpable energy in the room. "We're not just launching a product today, we're launching a new chapter," he proclaimed, excitement electrifying his words. Cheers erupted, and the applause surged like a wave, reinforcing his belief in their collective journey. They had faced doubt and fear, but together they had risen, transforming challenge into victory. As the days passed, momentum continued to build. Daniel found himself growing more confident in his role, and the bond among his team members deepened, forged through shared experience and resilience. He realized that true leadership was not about being the loudest voice. It was about listening, empowering others, and embracing authenticity. One night he returned to the Rusty Anchor, the familiar hum of laughter greeting him as he stepped inside. He approached the bar and ordered a drink, raising it toward the glowing atmosphere. "To new beginnings," he said softly to himself, smiling at how far he had come. As he sipped from his glass, the vibrancy around him infused him with a renewed sense of purpose. He had once been the man sitting alone, yearning for change. Now he was a leader, guiding others through the storms of uncertainty. In that moment, Daniel realized that life's most significant transformations often begin with a simple drink, a bold choice, or a spark of courage that can lead to unexpected journeys. The future was bright. With his head held high, he knew he was ready for whatever lay ahead, prepared to embrace it all, one drink at a time. "Just one more drink," Daniel whispered, lifting the glass to his lips. It was a ritual he had come to embrace, an escape from the relentless grind of his life. The dim lighting of the Rusty Anchor wrapped around him like a comforting blanket, the kind you reach for on a rainy day. Tonight, however, something felt different. The bar hummed with energy, and Daniel scanned the room from his usual corner. Laughter bubbled up, the cheerful clinks of glasses merging with the soft strains of jazz music playing in the background. But his gaze landed on the table at the far end of the bar, the board members. They were dressed in sharp suits, their voices rising and falling like waves, filled with confidence and camaraderie. Just last week, Daniel had been in the hot seat, delivering bad news to his team about cutbacks. The weight of shared disappointment had hung in the air like a thick fog. He longed to break free from the confines of his position, the constant pressure to perform weighing heavily on his shoulders. He took a deep breath and asked for another drink, hoping it would dull the ache of unfulfilled dreams. But as he sat with his swirling thoughts, a sudden movement at the board's table caught his eye. Robert, the CEO, had stood up, his laughter echoing across the room. For a moment, Daniel imagined what it would feel like to command that level of presence. And then Robert shouted over to him, "Hey Daniel, why don't you come join us?" Respect was something Daniel craved deeply, and now, laid before him, was an opportunity he couldn't ignore. Heart pounding, he set his drink down and made his way to the table, each stride echoing like a drum in his ears. As he approached, he felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Robert gestured for him to sit down. "Come on, we're discussing our upcoming project." The question hung in the air, heavy with potential. Daniel hesitated, a cascade of doubt flooding his mind. Had he really been invited into their world? But as he took a seat, he felt something shift within him. This was his chance to prove he was more than just a cog in the machine. Slowly, the conversation flowed around him, talk of market strategies, innovative designs, and ambitious targets. Daniel listened intently, drawing in every word. Steel began to replace the uncertainty in his spine. Finally, after a particularly animated exchange, Robert turned toward him with an expectant look. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the weight of their gazes on him. "I think we need to focus on how we can resonate with a younger audience," he said, surprise flooding through him at the boldness of his own words. A hush fell over the table. Was he being too forward? But to his astonishment, Robert leaned in, intrigued. "Interesting, go on," he urged. The ensuing dialogue sparked a fire in Daniel he didn't know he had. Ideas tumbled from his lips. He found himself weaving a tapestry of concepts, suggestions, and dreams that captivated the board. He felt like a conductor leading an orchestra, instilling energy and rhythm into the conversation. When he finally wrapped up, the board erupted in applause. Robert exclaimed, clapping Daniel on the back. Flushed with excitement, Daniel left the rusty anchor that night ignited with hope. This experience wasn't just about momentary validation, it was a turning point in his life. As he lay in bed, he replayed the evening in his mind, heart pounding. Could this be the lead-up to something great, or a role where he truly belonged? Days passed, each one filled with a whirlwind of meetings and brainstorming sessions. Daniel found himself leading discussions, his confidence blossoming. For the first time, he felt the weight of responsibility, and he embraced it wholeheartedly. He was no longer merely an observer, he was an active participant in crafting the company's future. But as the pressure intensified, those nagging doubts crept back in. What if he wasn't good enough? Each presentation before the board left him feeling drawn and hollow, as if he were tangled in a web spun from his own insecurities. The board was supportive, but their unyielding expectations loomed ominously. One board member challenged during a review meeting. The room felt heavy with scrutiny, and Daniel breathed deeply, fingertips grazing the edges of the table as he sought his footing. "Yes, I can provide that," Daniel replied, forcing the confidence to echo through his voice. But as the days morphed into weeks, the stakes felt even higher. Tension pillowed in the air, thick and suffocating. The moment he stepped into the boardroom, he felt an all-too-familiar weight settle upon him. Then it happened. The day came when the company learned that external investors were growing impatient. The board called an emergency meeting. Daniel felt that tightening knot in his stomach again as he walked into the room. "This is serious, people," Robert said, his voice grave. "We need results, and we need them fast." The board members exchanged glances, the excitement from a few weeks earlier now teetering on the edge of doubt. Daniel's heart raced. This was crunch time, and suddenly he was terrified of failing. "Daniel, we're counting on you," another board member asked, all eyes piercing through him. The weight of them again. Was he truly ready for this? Summoning all the courage he could muster, he replied, "I'll give it my all." As he left the meeting, the pressure began to settle over him like a heavy fog. The fear of failure haunted every thought, whispering reminders of how close he felt to the edge of despair. That evening, longing for solace, he returned to the rusty anchor once more, the familiar melody of the jazz band singing in his ears. He ordered a drink, trying to drown the anxiety. As he sipped, thoughts churned in his mind. Was this the moment he would finally succeed, or the moment he would crash and burn? "Hey Daniel, you look a bit stressed," came a voice from behind him. He knew that voice. Ivy, one of his colleagues. "Yeah, just trying to figure out everything going on with the project," he replied, forcing a smile. She offered genuinely, and just like that, Daniel found himself sharing his fears, how he felt the weight of failure looming over him. Ivy listened, her expressions empathetic but encouraging. "You know, everyone feels that way sometimes. Don't forget why you started. You have the passion and talent to see this through," she reassured him. Feeling lighter after sharing the burden, Daniel's resolve returned. The next day he gathered his team once more, this time armed with renewed determination. "Let's dive deeper. We can overcome these challenges together," he announced with newfound vigor. Ideas flowed freely as they collaborated, scribbling notes and sketching out a revised plan. The anxiety that had plagued him transformed into excitement, and for the first time in weeks he felt like he could conquer the mountain before him. As they developed their strategy, something unexpected happened. A new competitor emerged, their product offering similar features but a buzz and flair that threatened to overshadow their previous momentum. Fear cast shadows again as Daniel summoned the team to discuss the challenge. "We can't let this discourage us. We need agile thinking. Let's enhance our unique selling points and pitch them to our audience in a way they can't ignore," he declared, the passion simmering in his voice. Daniel observed their spirits lift as they engaged in animated discussions, refining their ideas with vigor. They brainstormed late into the night, laughter mingling with exhaustion as they envisioned a plan to reclaim their spotlight. But just as they wrapped up the evening, Daniel received a cryptic message from Robert. "We need to talk first thing in the morning." His heart raced. Was it bad news? Had they lost the confidence of the board overnight? For the first time in a long time, anxiety gripped him, a relentless beast roaring in his chest. As he tossed and turned in bed, he prepared for the worst. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the office, each step heavy with uncertainty. He found Robert waiting for him in the conference room, the board already seated, their expressions serious. "Daniel," Robert began, "there have been developments. Our competitors gaining traction and we need to adapt quickly. The board has decided." The words hung in the air, a lifeline and a weight simultaneously. "Me lied, but I," Daniel stammered, grappling with the weight of responsibility. "Yes. You're the one we trust to pull this off. You're uniquely positioned after all the hard work you put into this project," Robert encouraged, leaning in. Daniel's mind raced. He had to deliver this time. Failure hadn't been an option before, but now it felt even more profound. A sudden thought hit him. If he failed here, what would it mean for his career, for the team who believed in him? "Okay," he managed to say, forcing the words past the lump in his throat. "I'll do it." Board members nodded, their expressions a mix of faith and expectation. In that moment, sitting there in the conference room, everything shifted. This was his defining moment, the pivotal turning point where he would rise or fall. As he left the meeting, a wave of determination surged through him. This was not just about him anymore. It was about the team, the collective efforts that had shaped their vision. Daniel raced down the corridors, ready to gather his colleagues and share the news. "Listen up, everyone," he declared, adrenaline coursing through his veins. But as he prepared to lead them into battle, a new doubt, a voice echoing the words of the board, lingered in the back of his mind. Could he really rise to this occasion? Could he be the leader they needed? The clock ticked ominously and Daniel pressed forward into uncharted territory. The stakes were set, the pressure intensified, and as he prepped the team for the storm ahead, the question loomed large. Which path would they ultimately take? Would they embrace the challenge or let it slip away through their fingers? And so, in that moment, Daniel knew he was on the brink of something remarkable, or something disastrous. All he could do now was dive headlong into the uncertain future and hope he could steer the ship through the storm. With hearts pounding and breath held tight, they prepared to launch into the unknown, where everything could change in an instant.